My brothers and sisters, I'm talking to you about one of my favorite subjects, about peace, reconciliation, and especially our community safety forums. It's really important that we know that guns aren't the way to cure our problems or fix something in our lives. We need to realize that we need to be protective of all of our children and all of our 44 school sites. That we need to be protective of meetings and church assemblies. And the only way to do that is for us to be aware of our surroundings and be diligent in what we do.
I want to talk to you all today about the importance of framing gun violence prevention as a public health epidemic. If there were any other public health issue in this country that took 85 lives a day, we would be mobilizing all of our resources as a nation to find a solution. We know about undercooked hamburger or defective car seats, and they're on the news night after night until there's a solution. 85 deaths a day. This is not a political issue. This is a public health epidemic.
We have such an obligation now as a society, as a community, to reflect on and deeply consider these tragedies and the topic of why they occur and how they occur and what we can do about it. As a nation, of course, we go with our hearts immediately to victims, families, and friends whose lives will never be the same, who are just dramatically different people because of these acts of violence that occurred and touched them in some way. Together, we as a community have a responsibility to do all we can to prevent and reduce gun violence. And this can be done through a wide variety of measures, including keeping guns out of the hands of criminals, those who pose a danger to themselves and others, and deeply mentally disturbed individuals. The issue of gun violence in America is so real, so large, so overwhelming, so often.
One of the great public safety tools is faith, probably greater than law enforcement. When law enforcement looks at itself from the standpoint of just enforcement, it's very difficult to predict where these pockets of violence are going to occur. They can happen rather spontaneously without any forewarning. The buildup for violence, however, is rather privatized. It's hard to see who's building up for a violent act. But the truth of the matter is, there is a need to talk about why human beings are prone to act violently.
When people are engaged in activity that intimidates and causes violence in a community, we have to react to it. The question is how? But we have to react to it in part because our failure to do so, we now know from science, could be consigning a whole generation of kids in neighborhoods throughout our city to have less than their full potential fulfilled because their brains won't develop properly.
Domestic violence touches everyone, especially children. Studies have shown that even if a child is not physically abused, just being in the home and witnessing violence not only scars the child emotionally, but leads to behavior as an adult mimics what they've seen. So we know boys who grew up in homes where they witnessed domestic violence are twice as likely to abuse their partner in their own relationship as adults. And the thing about domestic violence in children is we know and we can guess that it affects them emotionally, but it also affects their brain development. So children who are witnessing that violence are constantly in survival mode. And so the part of their brain that is used for learning, reading, and writing in school is not being accessed. So they may go to school and try to learn to read and write, but they're so used to accessing that survival mode just to get through the violence, they just have trouble learning. So it has a really, really significant effect on children.
When we were young couples with children, we were very anxious about letting our children, go to play at a stranger's house that we didn't really, they were acquaintance, they were coming over for a play date. We asked if there was a pool, what about dogs in the house? How many have asked if there was a gun in the home, and if so, how was it stored? We don't have any compunction about taking Grandpa's car keys away when we feel he's a danger to himself or others. How many of us think about, what about Dad's gun?
We can make sure that our properties are a safe place, that if there's a disaster, each of our properties have a plan.
When you start to think about your congregation's disaster plan, how can you serve your community in the disaster recovery. It's not just about your congregation being taken care of. It's for your congregation to look out to see who are the most vulnerable around you to serve them.
What this is about is post-incident and recovery. We're talking about, in this planning, what happens when Corey, our first responder, has gone. And he is now gone. So what happens next? And when we had the station fire and other events, it blew through, it did its thing, and everybody said, what do we do now? And this is the kind of planning that will help you answer those questions and help your parish and your community and your parishioners recover from that disaster.
I also want you to think about the useless violence that takes place, most recently in Sparks, Nevada, where people were killed because someone was angry or mentally ill and attacked people senselessly.
Churches are always open and welcoming. You want people to come in. You want them to feel at home. You want them to feel like they're part of the congregation. But you also need to recognize them and maybe some of you have ways of doing that, like, welcome, who's new here I see that you're new here, and you go up and talk to them. Let them know that you know that they're there, okay? Because part of the violence is the anonymity that they have. Well, if they're not anonymous and you have approached them and you've welcomed them, they've lost that part of maybe a potential violent situation that they're thinking about in their mind. In addition, you know your congregations. You know the people that are in your congregations and the ones that have issues. Make sure that you're helping them get through those issues spiritually, but also mentally and physically. Direct them to doctors. Maybe you have doctors that you work with. If you don't, maybe you can find some in the community that are willing to come in and help counsel people through their mental issues and mental problems.
And I would say another way, this is very simple, that you can help us, is simply call us. And I know that sounds odd, but I can't tell you how many people I have heard say, Sheriff, in my community I saw this car, I thought maybe the guy was there selling drugs or just looked suspicious or didn't belong in the neighborhood, but we didn't want to call and bother you. We want the calls. That's how we find out what's going on. You are the best person to know what doesn't look right in your community.
It's really hard for me to kind of talk about this because it is everybody's worst fear, worst nightmare, hardest thing to deal with. There's not one person in here after Newtown that didn't hold their family members, their daughters, kids, grandchildren a little bit closer that night.
I want to thank Lois Capps, who was in Santa Barbara with us, a congresswoman. I want to thank Lee Baca. I want to thank Michael Fuhr. And I want to thank the numerous law enforcement officers who came and helped represent the need for nonviolent behavior in our communities. We also had social agencies that talked about women's violence and men's violence against one another, and talked about the fact that we need to do proactive behavior.
Hey, we have this homeless issue in our areas. We have people on the street corners begging. Not all of them need the money. Some of them need the money. We need to find a way to fix this, because we're not going to allow it to fix. Nobody likes to get on the freeway and as you're stopping there, somebody's walking up, banging on your window, wanting money. Because we all want to help that person, but does that person really need our money and our help at that point?
People who do not have food and who do not have shelter do not know that there is a hope for tomorrow. So we can't really start talking about educating people and giving them more skills and things like that when they don't know where tomorrow's meal comes from, or today's meal.
It was overwhelming how sensitive people were to the issue of violence, peace, and reconciliation. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, is working on reconciliation and justice by going to every province of the worldwide Anglican Communion, meeting with the leaders and seeing how we can be reconciled to one another. Be faithful. Pray for us, pray for him, pray for continued work in the area of nonviolent behavior. God bless you, and thank you.